Today has been quite hectic for me. I've been doing stuff with family. I'm trying to watch the seasonal coverage while I'm also spending time with them. And on top of that, if you can't tell, I'm losing my voice. It started last night. I was dealing with it on stream. I'm still dealing with it today. So apparently this reveal season is just when I push through things, whether it's Vex, side effects, or losing my voice or whatever. But we're going to talk about Malphite. Malphite was revealed today. Very exciting for me personally because I love the flavor of Malphite. Malphite is showing us what you can do with a real dad bod. Yes, I believe in my heart of hearts that Chip is Malphite's son. You can't convince me otherwise. And Malphite is the kind of dad that I aspire to be because he is literally rock hard from head to toe. But outside of all the flavor stuff that I'll highlight when we talk about Malphite, there is also some other things I want to talk about where I feel like he misses the mark just a hair. So first, let's talk about the actual champion. Malphite is a 7-cost Targon champion. He has a 6'10 body with tough. So Malphite is a tanky unit at 7 mana. His level up condition is that you've summoned, and that's very important, you've summoned 12 or more mana of landmarks. Now that's important because that means that Malphite is going to work with cards like the Blue Sentinel, for example, because when that card dies, when the last breath triggers and we get the Crest of Insight, that 2 mana of a summon of a landmark is very relevant. It's also interesting because this means that Malphite will finally, and this is one of the big things that I like about his design, will finally give you some benefit to Talia copying things. So for example, back when Temple was broken, and it's still pretty good now, if you were playing Talia with Targon, you would copy the temples, and the benefit of doing so was just that you had 2 temples, and that was good enough at the time. But now that would be 2/3 of the way toward leveling up Malphite, because you'd get credit for both the initial one and then the created one from Talia because it has been summoned. It does not have to be played. So what do you get when you level up Malphite? Well, you get that standard +1/+1 on the body, so it becomes a 7/11. Yes, he is full of convenience. Love all of the jokes that we can stick in there. Still has that tough keyword as well, but also now says when I'm summoned or leveled up or round start, if you have the attack token, create an unstoppable force in hand. And unstoppable force is a 2-cost slow fleeting spell that just says stun all enemies. Now, this is why I love the flavor of the card. If you are somebody who's played League of Legends, you know that Malphite is just renowned for his initiation. He's got this AoE stun, and he's usually great at starting team fights. He gets that crowd control very early on, so your whole team can capitalize on it, and that's kind of the feeling that you get here. This is a great representation in Legends of Runeterra of the League of Legends counterpart Malphite. But now here's the but. Just like with team fights, you've got to have a team to take advantage of it, and Malphite wants you to be playing landmarks. So it's a little bit clunky in that regard. Now, a lot of the landmarks are not necessarily going to be permanent landmarks, but there is some board space considerations to be made. Now, here's the other issue, and this is where I think that they missed the mark just a hair. I really wish this, instead of round start if you have the attack token, I think it should be reading when you gain the attack token. Now, that would function just like Riven, and you might be saying, okay, but Targon isn't the region of rally synergy, right? Whereas Noxus does have those rally effects, and it makes sense in that regard. And I would agree with you. However, for very unique interactions, the game has shown that they are willing to break from what I call the region pie, if you will. So Garen is a great example, right? Garen, renowned for his self-regen. He's in Demacia. That's not traditionally a regen region, but we let Garen have it because it's Garen. And I don't even think that this is truly making Malphite a rally champion by making that change, but it allows you to take advantage of it, because one of the things that Malphite is also known for is those kind of snap initiations where he just comes out of nowhere and he catches you off guard, and then you lose a team fight solely because of this Malphite initiation. And I would love to be able to play kind of like a spring the trap archetype with Malphite, where if your opponent overextends, they spend too much mana, you slap them with the rally effect, and then you also get the stun on top of it, because you would already, even with your cheapest rally effects, need to commit 5 mana to doing this, along with 2 cards, both the rally effect and then also the unstoppable force. But I like the idea of just turning a battle on its head and saying, okay, I'm gonna get this big all-in attack out of nowhere. Now, I also think that that's important because the other issue here is that Malphite does not have Overwhelm, just has that tough keyword. Yes, Malphite's a big body, but if you don't have a team to complement Malphite, then Malphite, even with the unstoppable force, Malphite by himself is likely still getting chump blocked, or at least forcing your opponent to kind of keep up with you in terms of the game of attrition. Now, what I mean by that is that, let's say you've got a leveled Malphite. So it's round start. You get Unstoppable Force. Because it's a slow spell, I start by playing Unstoppable Force because I want to remove the blockers that my opponent has. And then they answer by just playing another blocker because priority passes to them. Okay, so my Malphite gets chump blocked by a 1/1. Or, you know, something else small or insignificant. Now, Malphite doesn't care about that exchange. Again, he's very tanky. He's got tough as well, but it just doesn't feel great if that's the end result. Now, again, if you've got a full squad, you're likely pushing damage, so I get it. But just in a vacuum, the result of having spent all of this mana on your landmarks and then potentially not having a wide board as a result of doing so, because that's where your investments have been, along with keeping yourself alive and general game maintenance, if you will. I don't know. I feel like the splash, the big payoff, is something that's going to look really good on paper, but in practice not be as impressive. I hope I'm wrong. I sincerely hope I'm wrong. Now, you might be saying, well, Charmer, they just revealed this card called Spiral Stairs and you can give Malphite Overwhelm, and what's your problem? And I agree with you. I think that that's potentially what was intended for that card, but now I can't help but go back and think that card costs 3. It has a countdown of 3, and so now that card's even more clunky than it kind of already was, because if you play it on curve, you can't even use the effect on Malphite because he costs 7. So the only way that you're playing that on curve and also getting the benefit is if you can time the death of a blue sentinel to get the blue buff at the right time, because the Spiral Stairs creates a fleeting card. So if they changed that to not be fleeting, I'd be happy. Or if Malphite cost 1 less, so you could play that on curve into a big Malphite play, I'd be happy. And it's possible it's still good enough as is, but it is something I noticed, is that the timing is a little bit off there. Maybe it's meant to be clunky. Maybe if you're a giant boulder of a being, your interactions aren't necessarily meant to be timely. I don't know. Maybe that's the point of all of this, is that everything is just a little bit off. The Unstoppable Force timing, just a little bit off because it's not triggerable after a rally. And the Spiral Stairs just a little bit off because you can't play it on curve into a Malphite on curve. I don't know, maybe that's by design, but that is, for the most part, Malphite. Now, obviously, this is a card that says stun on it. So when this was revealed earlier in the day, my Twitter timeline had a lot of people excited about Yasuo. And listen, I made a joke on Twitter about it, and I'll make that joke until Yasuo is good, which is that every time there's a card with the word stun printed on it, people suddenly, they're like, hey, Yasuo, and then Yasuo is still not good. And I think that is going to be the same case here as well. But I'm also not your dad. You can play whatever you want. Listen, I play garbage decks all the time, so don't let me stop you from living your Malphite Yasuo dream. I wish that combination of champions was better than I expect it to be, because they're great to play together in actual League of Legends, because it's not just that Malphite stuns in an AoE, it's specifically a knockup that allows Yasuo to then ultimate, and it's a big deal. And this interaction would actually be a big deal if you can pull it off. If you get your leveled Yasuo and you play Unstoppable Force, you've probably spent 2 mana as a one-sided board wipe. The problem is that to get to 12 mana worth of landmarks for your Malphite level up, and also having enough stuns in your deck to satisfy Yasuo means you probably haven't done much else for the rest of the game. So you are committing a very large portion of your deck for something that you could probably pull off with much less investment in other regions and in other combos. I want Yasuo to be good, gang. As much as I make fun of him, I legitimately wish that the card and the champion were in a better spot than they are, but I don't think this is what suddenly makes Yasuo competitive. But there was more than just Unstoppable Force in Malphite that had the stun word on it. So another card that was revealed today is his champion spell. So again, this is what Malphite becomes if you have multiple copies, and it's also just going to be a regular spell in the game. So this is Malphite's Ground Slam. My brain was trying to read it as Grand Slam. It's definitely not a Grand Slam. This is a 4-cost fast spell in Targon that says stun a unit. More stuns. Deal 3 to it if you've summoned a landmark this game. So this is interesting because it's kind of got a little bit of that Yasuo effect baked in, as long as you've summoned at least one landmark. And let's be honest, in a deck like this, you've done that by the time you're playing this. So really this becomes like Gacha, where you're paying for at fast speed to deal 3 to a unit. I guess the real benefit here is that if it's a much bigger unit, then you also get the stun, right? So it's like the Gacha, but with upside. But the upside is that it stops bigger units, and the downside is that you can't ever play it cheaper. I think that's a fair trade-off. Like, this card is fine. This card is potentially usable in the right deck. But again, I don't think this suddenly pushes Yasuo any harder. It helps that it's fast speed in Targon. Targon's stuns have traditionally been slow speed. It's stuff like Crescent Strike or triggering Daybreak effects off of Leona, for example, to get those kinds of stuns. So Targon is certainly a region where stunning has been part of the theme and has existed, but the fact that this is fast speed does actually help in that regard. I actually think that this card, I think Ground Slam, is actually going to do more for any sort of potential Yasuo deck than the Malphite side of things would, just because, again, in order to pull it off, you have to invest a lot of stuns and landmarks. And based on what we've seen so far, that's not the best proposition, especially with Ionia. Like, you're banking pretty hard on the Targon landmarks for pulling this off, because you can't even like work in the Shurima ones with countdown as well to maybe satisfy your Malphite itch. So I don't know, but ground slam's fine as a card. The last card that was revealed was Stonebreaker. Now this was kind of leaked early last night as well. I saw it floating around a couple of Discord communities, but this is a 6-cost Targon follower. It has a 6/4 body, and it says play. So this is a play effect, and it's also a skill effect. So this is going to be counterable by cards like Deny or Right in Negation. But on play, if you've summoned 4 or more landmarks this game, you deal 4 to an enemy and 2 to the enemy nexus. Now, I will highlight that this card is very interesting and unique because it's direct damage in Targon, and that's not unheard of. We've got stuff like Crescendum, and we've got stuff like Sunburst, for example. But this is just 4 damage to any enemy. Doesn't matter whether it's follower, champion, whatever. But it's also 2 damage to the enemy nexus. And so that kind of burn is something that is a bit new-ish to Targon. And certainly the combination of those 2 things does not feel like your traditional Targon interaction. So Stonebreaker is pretty neat in that regard. The 6/4 body for 6 is, I guess, okay, but usually you get a lot more with it at that kind of a cost. I mean, you're talking like Jarvan levels of stats and cost for something that's already conditional, and you can't level up Stonebreaker, etc., etc. Now, that being said, I think Stonebreaker, if you're going to go with this dedicated landmark themed deck, I think Stonebreaker makes the cut. Because anytime historically that you've had removal on a body, if it's even somewhat viable, it'll find a home. It's a really powerful play. And the 6/4 body is very relevant because It obviously trades very well with that 6 attack. It threatens the enemy nexus very well. This is the on curve play that you maybe hit with that spiral staircase. So if you're not landing it on Malphite, if you play it on 3 and then you have Stonebreaker come down on 6, and then all of a sudden this becomes a 9-6 overwhelm that just nuked a unit, well, now that is a play to get excited about. That is a reason to suddenly say, okay, maybe there's something to this archetype. But that's a lot of ifs, right? You still have to have hit your 4 landmarks by the time this comes down for that to work. And obviously playing the seed that you get from the spiral staircase is still an action you have to take, right? It's a slow spell, etc., etc. There's a lot of ways that your opponent gets to interact with that particular combo, but that is a very impressive turn 6. If you're just talking about like on curve plays, if you've played your staircase on 3 and then on turn 6 you nuke something, you get some chip damage in from the play effect, and then on top of that you end up with a 9-6 overwhelm, like that seems pretty good. So that's it for the Malphite reveal. It's really just kind of a continuation of the stuff we got to see yesterday. I don't know. I love, again, that this gives you a reason to potentially play Talia. I just don't know if there's going to be enough oomph in a Shurima Targan landmark heavy deck like that on their own. We'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see. That, I mean, that's it's going to take some testing. I don't know. I can see the potential for some very high impact plays here, but my gut without testing just says that you're going to have too many low impact turns early on to set up the big stuff. And I'm not sure that the big stuff will be enough of a payoff to turn around a game that's gotten out of hand because of the low tempo plays early on. Again, don't know for sure without testing, but that's my initial gut reaction. This is one of those instances where I just sincerely hope I'm wrong, because I think this would be a cool archetype to play. It's something that's a bit unique and has not quite existed in this capacity in Legends of Runeterra yet, and anytime we can open up a new deck archetype, I think that's good for the game, even if it never ends up being super popular. Deep is a great example. Deep is like just on the edge of competitive viability. It's one of those things that you can bring in a tournament lineup, but it's never, at least historically thus far, I guess I should say, you know, never is a strong term, right? But historically it hasn't been the most popular deck in a tournament lineup, but it's good enough that it can come in and out of certain lineups depending on the meta, and it's a very unique deck play style. I love that about Deep, and that's why you get those diehard Deep fans. I would love for some sort of landmark based deck to be that as well. Be that deck archetype where you're like, you know what? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, but it exists because the more ways that you can give players options and let them kind of what I call player self-expression, right? We're all playing a card game, but we all love to play card games in different ways. Some of us like aggro, some of us like control, some of us like OTKs, some of us like novelty combos, some of us like doing the same thing that my neighbor does, but just in a wildly different way, because maybe I want to do it with Deep and play big things, and maybe you want to make landmarks that make big things, and maybe, you know, my other friend just wants to play natively big things or whatever, right? The more ways that you can give players to express their preferred play style, the better off your game will be. I think that's one of the reasons that other games like Magic the Gathering have been so good historically, is because they give players so many options that eventually, once you've picked up the game and you kind of put yourself through a couple of games here and there, you'll find something that clicks for you. I think that's the goal. And so I think, again, this archetype is good for the game. And if it's not good enough, I'd love to see it get a buff here or there so that, again, it's on the cusp. Like, it doesn't need to be a tier 1 deck, but if it's even remotely viable, I think that's a net positive for the game overall. And I love net positives for the game. I want to see the game grow and I want to see people have fun. So anyway, I'm ranting at this point, and obviously my voice can't take it. So I think we're gonna stop here and say, if you made it this far, I appreciate you. Thank you for watching. As always, if you're new, consider subscribing. I swear I don't always sound like I'm a chronic smoker. This is just a temporary thing, but I love you all, and until next time, may you walk on warm sands.